Hi everyone, welcome to my second episode of Liberty and Freedom. Welcome Rohan.
Hey, hi, buddy. Nice to be on the podcast.
Thanks for coming on, man. How are you doing, man?
All good, brother. You tell me,
Yeah,
how's
man,
life?
everything good, man. So, please introduce yourself, like what you do and what you did in the past and what are you doing now?
Sure, that's gonna be quite a long one, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So basically, I started looking into events and questioning events since the last 4 to 5 years. But what sparked my journey into that was a bad phase in my life. It basically started to make me ask deeper questions about the nature of reality and the nature of self and self identity. Who are we? What happens when we die? Those kind of questions, which eventually landed up making me look down a rabbit hole of spiritual and sort of what most people call mystical esoteric knowledge. And that eventually pursuing the truth in that area also started make me question, okay, if we never got this version of events from the mainstream about what's going on in the afterlife or in the paranormal, sort of what's really going on in the world here that we're not being told. And that basically started my journey of making me look into what's wrong with our physical world and politics and government and how governments are staging false flag attacks and lying and engaging in rituals and all of these different things. So yeah, it's been a long road, but where I am now, I've basically come at a place where I think I've amassed enough knowledge and enough opinion to be able to actually spread this information and try to make people aware about it so we can do something about what's going on.
Okay, so how you got started? Like, how was your journey like? Like you went to college and
Yeah, so
it just
basically, I was in academia. I was doing a bachelor's in accounts and finance, but I mean, I tell the story to a lot of people, but basically, towards my end of second year, I felt like dropping out because I used to go to college and like I literally run the debates with my teachers about because I was doing a finance course and like the most prominent thing that we Bitcoiners and just people who are looking into the banking system in general care about is the scam of how fiat money gets created.
yeah.
So I put these questions forward to my faculty and the people who are teaching in college, and usually it was a lot of trying to dismiss it away, like you don't come off into college, so shouldn't ask questions, kind of thing. But I mean, I never got satisfactory answers. So like, I remember like the couple of questions I would ask is, firstly, like why do banks have the power to create money out of thin air? And most importantly, if the banks are lending the money from commercial banks and central banks that basically get to make the money without any effort, like they literally just type it on a screen and get to create the money, or like the RBI can also just print the money at a relatively like cheap cost. Why do the governments have to pay them back and then pay them back plus interest? If
Mhm.
they get to create it out of thin air and the government is a sovereign, why can't they just do it and not have us pay it back? Like, it's like imagine if someone's mining gold out of the ground, you don't have to pay the ground back, right? So if like, they're just creating currency, they can just create currency and let it circulate.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I support that, but I'm just saying like, if you're a status and you believe in government, that would be the better thing to do.
Mhm.
Instead of letting the banks have a monopoly and us having to struggle all our lives to be able to just manage to pay back the debt off and pay them back interest which they never create. We can just basically let the government print the money and just let it circulate in the economy and not have to pay the debt back. And then once that money circulates, it's like, if you actually work for that money, then you want to lend it to someone, of course, there'll be interest because you'll like be, deferring your actual wealth and giving it to someone else for that point of time. But it just doesn't make sense that these people have the power to just effortlessly create money and then enslave other people's lives for that. So, these kind of things actually put me off. And I'm studying Austrian economics now. I've been studying it for quite some time. And we never got to hear about it in school or college. Like, the only people you hear about are Keynes or Marx. And you never hear about Macy's or Rothbard or any of these people who've actually, done tremendous amount of intellectual work into articulating these ideas about how society can function without a state. And I started getting exposed to those people early on, and seeing their views on economics compared to how Keynesian economics is taught to us in college. Basically, that the government is needed; it needs to intervene in the markets to solve market failures and stuff like that. So uh, I was very put off with these things, and I mean, specifically, I'm in a finance course, but just about everything they're teaching, has something that they're not telling. It's like mistruths and half truths. So I want to drop out a second year, honestly, because I was getting more value just pursuing education myself than I was in college, and I saw it as a massive waste of my time. But I just finished it for personal reasons and family reasons as well, and ever since then, I've just been on a journey to actually get knee deep into this information in all these different subject areas, not just finance and economics, but everything that I've been looking into over the years, and make people informed and aware about it, because that's what's sorely lacking since the education system has such a tough grip on people's minds today.
Okay, so you label yourself as an anarchist.
Yeah.
So what exactly the anarchy means?
Anarchy is basically like a very misused term. So a lot of media people and government people tend to misuse it. Like, you'll see pictures on TV where people are like, fuck, throwing rocks or breaking something. They'll be like, this is anarchy. Do you want anarchy or do you want the state? Like, then people are like, oh no, we obviously want the state. The state is our master and savior. But anarchy is not chaos or anything like that. Anarchy actually, like your previous guest Jamin was saying,
Mhm.
it's freedom with responsibility. The little word means an, which is the first half, which is without, which is a Latin word, and archon means ruler, master, authority, and it just means without authority. It doesn't mean without laws, without rules, without someone telling you what to do. It's not like you can do anything you want, but there are certain boundary conditions within which you are free to express your behavior as long as you don't infringe on the rights of others. So just like you own yourself and you own your property, other people do the same as well. So you can do whatever you like as long as you don't infringe on someone else's property rights or self ownership rights. And if you're doing that, then why will someone else uh, respect and validate your rights as well? Like, as soon as you violate someone else's rights, someone has a right to violate you back. And
Okay.
as long as you don't do that, you can basically do anything you want. And this is where the subject of rights come in. So a lot of people think that rights have some pronouncements or like fundamental rights and stuff that supposedly a constitution gives us. These positive rights that we have a right to food, we have a right to healthcare. You actually don't have a right to anything that requires the labor of someone else. So if someone has to work or perform an action for you to have a right, it's not a right. All a right means is that you're free to do anything you want, and you don't have the right to aggress on people, to harm people, to rape people, to murder people, to take their property. You don't have the right to do all those things, and everything other than that is naturally a right, because it doesn't involve harming another sentient being in the process. So this is what anarchy actually means. We need to break the government narrative and the mainstream narrative on anarchy, and actually try to bring it to people that anarchy is just peaceful people getting along voluntarily and not coercing or forcing other people to pay for things that they don't want to pay for.
Okay, so government and all these media consider anarchist the one who just throws around all these bottles and destroy public property. So do you consider all these people who are going against government interventions and just going on the roads and trying to destroy all these things, do you consider them an anarchist, or what do you consider them? Like, they are also trying to help other people in other half.
Okay, so look, basically the way at least if you talk about India, the way I see the opposition in this country is most of them are leftists. Okay, so you're looking at a large number of people, specifically like when it comes to NDTV and JNU, and the majority of the opposition in the country is left. Okay, and the people who are in charge of the country are like as far right as you can imagine. So there's like this divide. There's this false divide, this false dialectic that's taking place, where the left and the right are both feeding each other, when the real opposition actually lies beyond both of those. So what you're seeing right now with all these protests and all, I mean, like uh, I have like I did a whole video about talking against the NRC and CAA, so it's not like I'm supporting the government or something. It's just that uh, if these leftists were to get into power, they'd be as bad, if not worse, as what the BJP is doing right now. So I don't like, they are, as long as they are oppressed and they are the ones who are getting the, brute force of the state, they are the ones who are going to rebel. But if they manage to get their people in, they'll basically go after people who disagree with them. So if you see it from that perspective, though, uh, I don't see, like, these people who literally go and destroy private property and break stuff and stuff. They actually causing a lot of chaos. They're not really anarchists, but uh, most of them land up coming from this commie sort of leftist anarchist perspective, where they don't believe in private property and they believe that to each according to his ability, to
But
each according to his
government
need.
do call them anarchists, right?
Yeah,
Is it
that's
on
what I'm
purpose?
saying.
Is it on purpose?
uh, no, I don't think it's on purpose. Those people genuinely think of themselves as anarchists, but this is why even within the anarchist community, we don't see anarcho-communists as anarchists, because they don't really believe in private property rights. They don't believe that uh, we can mix our labor with our own natural resources and
What do you
have.
mean by private property rights?
Okay, so basically, I'll just step back a bit. When we came on this planet, okay, whatever you believe, whether it was nature, it was God, we had these natural resources landed up before us, and we are free to do with them what we choose. So no one owned them when we came to this planet, and if it's like they say everyone owns it. So if one person can't own it, how can everyone own it? It's like, if you don't have the right to own it, how can you delegate to a large group of people? So private property rights are basically, you mix your labor, you mix your own human essence with something that's unowned, and then it becomes an extension of you. And even your right to self ownership, like, you just your right to do what you want with your body, to exercise your freedom of speech. You can't do it without property rights. It's like, if you don't have the property rights to stand or to, like, sit in this place that we're talking in right now, and if it belongs to someone else, you don't really have freedom of speech, because if some other people can decide if you stay here or not, it's infringing on your property rights and your right to actually express your opinions. So this is what they don't actually believe in. They don't believe that people have the right to own property, and that everything should be collectively owned. And, like, we can go into the problems of socialism, but I think we should leave in for another podcast or
Episode, yeah.
something. But socialism and communism, in the name of everyone owning everything and the collective good, it always leads to tyranny and a small group of people actually controlling the whole population in the name of the collective.
But then who will decide? Like, you are saying that if you put your resources in a property, then it will be yours. But what if the other person comes and he also tries to put in his resources?
So basically, there are continuums all over the place. Okay, if you look at it in this way, I'm telling you that you don't have the right to initiate aggression against me. So if I do this to you, is it aggression right now? Or like, if I actually smack you in the face, does it count as aggression?
Yeah.
So there are those kinds of continuums all over the place. Like, someone who's trying to move his hands 5 meters away from you, or someone who's 5 centimeters away from you. Like, what would someone count as aggression? So in the same way, even when it comes to property rights, it all depends on culture, context, and the opinion of the reasonable man. So basically, the way we will handle property rights in a stateless society is through the private law and the private court system, which again is like a whole different topic we'll have to get into. But in a nutshell, basically, you will have private competing courts. You won't have these monopolies on the justice system that the state has right now. And, they will actually grant property contracts in a way to resolve disputes. So you're not going to, like, it's obvious, like, if you're just going to go in a forest and say, I actually walked around this area and now this forest is mine, no one's going to uphold that. Like, it's just like, think of it this way. Like, I always have to ask the question, like, how do people know? But some things are just intuitively known. It's like, if I go and shoot you today, no one's gonna say, like, oh, maybe that's not aggression. Like, any sane person's gonna say, yeah, that's aggression. So if we know that a person has actually taken the effort over his life to go and build a house, to construct him by himself, and to actually have his own property. Like, people are going to respect his property rights and the courts are going to uphold it. But if some person's acting nasty and, trying to usurp other people's land in the name of his private property, the courts aren't going to uphold it really.
But who will decide all these, where will be the limit, once you say that? Even, is it even realistic, once you, like, for example, if we had any problems with the property, then we just go to a private court, and then who will decide the boundaries, like what kind of thing considered as aggression, or what kind of thing considered as violence, or all this stuff?
Yeah, so I'd like to draw parallels to private law with science and language. Okay, so right now we're using these words. Okay, that's the literal words itself. How do you know what it means? Okay, did some authority sort of come and tell you, like, this words means, like, collection of letters? Like, did they have to tell you that, or was there some government that actually maintained this registry of what words mean, or maintained an official dictionary of sorts, and if you sort of spoke against it, you'd be thrown in jail? It doesn't work like that. Like, we as a community, we build on certain standards and knowledge, and then those standards are generally upheld by society. And imagine it this way, okay, we know what certain words mean, and we know grammar to an extent, like what grammar to use in language. Now if someone was to use wrong grammar, there would be gray areas. So someone would say, okay, maybe that's right, some expert would say maybe that's wrong, and you're going to have that. Like, that's just natural. You know the way things work in the world. It's like just accepting the reality of the world, that there's always going to be gray areas, and sometimes things will never be clear cut. And if people are not able to resolve those conflicts uh, by adjusting and compromising among themselves, it's going to lead to conflict. No one is saying that in an anarchist world you're not going to have any violence, or, like, people are not going to aggress against each other. Anarchy is not a guarantee for your rights not being violated. It's just the possibility to express real freedom. And if someone is violating your rights, you just have the full right to defend yourself against it. And I I mean, think of it this way. So like, I was drawing parallels with language right now, and even this holds true in science as well. So no one really came and told us, okay, this is objectively what a liter means. Like, a liter means 1,000 milliliters. So no one had to come and tell us this. Like, if I was I'd like to explain this in the way of saying, like, when I put these parallels to people, like, they're analogies, obviously, so they're not exactly the same. But people always tell me, okay, look, honestly, if a word was disputed, or if someone had a dispute in words, no one's going to go to jail over it, or no one's going to actually get in trouble. But if there's a dispute in property, and say someone has paid the judge in order to, like, hand the property title to someone else, that's going to involve real physical consequences. So it's not actually true. Like, think of it in this way, okay? We all have a certain agreed convention of words, okay? We know that 10 grams of silver means 10 grams of silver. If I'm writing a contract with you right now, and I tell you, okay, like, you work for me and I'll pay you 10 grams of silver. When the contract ends, you come to me and I give you 1 gram, and I tell you, no, that for me 10 grams means 1 gram. Like, who the hell is going to uphold it? You don't need authority for that. You just know this guy is, like, lying and trying to engage in fraud. So like,
So,
when you start to think about things in this way, it makes much more sense that when conventions develop, you don't really need authorities to enforce them, but people just know that someone is engaging in fraud or lying when they're obviously, going overboard with it. But if there's genuine gray areas, then there'll be disputes. And the best way we have to resolve disputes is to have property rights, so that people compromise. It's like, we have a dispute in property. The best thing to do is not to say that we both own it at the same time and then we both get to decide what happens with it. That's going to lead to much more conflict than saying that, okay, dude, look, we can agree to this. You own this much, I own this much, and we get to resolve a conflict that way.
so this is more of a social consensus thing
It's
than it
not
is.
really. Look, so just because there are continuums and that there are sort of facts that, like the age of consent, for example. Okay, we all know 12 is too young. Like, 12 is too young to actually consent to sex. But
But again, who will decide? That's the
that's what I'm saying.
question.
No, I'm saying it's for us to enforce these rules that we know. So it's obvious, and this doesn't just come into age. For example, you can look at someone who's mentally disabled, or someone who might not have the capacity to consent. If that person's gonna be dragged into a contract, and they're gonna be taken to a reputable court, the court is like, the judge is going to look at the circumstances and say that, uh, no, this person wasn't in a capacity to consent, looking at all the facts that I have available. So if you're asking me who's gonna decide, basically, before we get into these agreements, we'll have contracts which will say that, look, okay, we are getting in this agreement. If we have a dispute, we'll basically go and resolve it at this cost, which we've already agreed upon. So that's pretty clear cut. Like, if I'm getting involved with you or something and we have a dispute, we both agree beforehand that we both trust this court and the court's judgment, and whatever judgment the court gives, we will live by it.
But that's what happening right now, isn't it?
I mean, no, like right now, what's happening is you don't have uniformity in law. You don't have the law being enforced to everyone in the same way. Like, just look at this for example. If you go to United States right now, in certain states, it's legal to smoke weed. Like, no one's gonna throw you in jail for doing that. But you just like, you move the borders and you come to another place in the world like India. For doing the same thing, someone can put you in a prison. So you already have, no, like, there's no uniformity in the law already. And it's not like, in today's system also, judges can't be bought off, or like, they can't be influenced by the state. We already have all of that. So if you want to compare this system to an anarchist system, you need to compare apples to apples. Like, I'm not saying that, we get rid of human nature altogether, or we get rid of corruption or anything. Those things are going to be there. It's just talking about, what is the way to go forward with these systems without having coercive monopolies on them, or without having to forcefully take people's money to be able to create these systems against their will. That's the principle that it's based on. So even though there's always going to be continuums, and those aren't really uh, arguments against principle, because we all start with the common basis that everyone has self ownership, and then everyone mixing the labor with the land gives them property. Now, to like, there will always be continuums, like what kind of property can you have with that, like, can you have a really large amount of land when there's scarcity of land. There's gonna be those continuums, but it doesn't it's not an argument against the principle that you have a right to do those things simply because you have a right to own yourself.
Okay, interesting. So why anyone should care about anarchy? Like, why an individual should care like
So
about an
I'll tell
anarchy?
you why I started caring in the
Yeah.
first place. So basically, I got into anarchy, like I was telling you earlier, at the end. So when I started looking into the world and what we were being lied to in the world, it was basically trying to get to the root of the problem. Okay, we are facing these problems. Our air is being poisoned. Like, we are being forced to take medical injunctions against our will. Our food supply is manipulated. Our finance is manipulated. Okay, we have all these problems, but what is actually the cause source of all of these problems that we are seeing in daily life manifesting in all of these areas? And the conclusion I reached eventually with that was that it's ultimately the belief in authority that's creating these problems, because we are literally saying, when we create government, that we can choose this special group of people who supposedly have these magical rights that none of us have. I'd like to draw some parallels and give you some examples
But
with this.
oh yeah, you can.
So
Sorry.
think of it this way. Okay, you and I don't have the right to steal, right? If we're going to go and rob our neighbor right now and forcefully try to take his money, uh, the neighbor will look at us like, these people are mad. They're just trying to come and steal from us. Now imagine if we got a bunch of, like, 5,000 anarchists in this room. We all selected our own representatives, and those representatives hadn't went to go, like, had a vote among themselves, and then they decided that, okay, now that since we have consensus and since we got so many people among us to vote, now we can go and actually tax the neighbor, and they call it taxes. That the neighbor still see it as wrong. It's like, she didn't consent to actually being part of an arrangement. She didn't consent to actually upholding the result that we come to. Like, if she was to come here and vote and say that, okay, if after this vote, uh, there's a decision that you'll come and take my money or something, I'll agree to that. But she never did that. So no matter how many people you have in a democracy, or even if it's like millions of people against one person, if that one person never actually wanted to become part of the arrangement and live by the results that that kind of arrangement gives it, you can't force your will on them, because none of us have the right to do so intuitively. And that's the whole thing that government is based on. It's based on this idea that these people in parliament have this magical authority to tell us what to do, to force us what to do, to take our money against our will, and then use it to do things that we don't have a say in deciding what happens with that money, really. So, if it's not possible for us to do these things, how did government really get the right? And it's because they got these rights that they're able to do all these destructive things and use our own energy and tax money against us in order to enslave us and like literally corrupt the world.
But again, like, who will decide? Like, if I'm living in India, for example, and there are like 1,000 people, and 999 from them agrees to do something, and one person says this, he don't want to be a part of it,
Yeah.
then where he will go? Like, he don't where he will go?
You don't
He is
have the
using
you
the
don't have the right to forcefully take his property away or move him from there. I mean, like, if we start with the common standard of property rights, and the courts have clearly demarcated and like allocated property in a way that everyone has agreed to up till that point in time. Uh, just imagine, like, this house. Who's gonna dispute the property rights of this house? I'm not like claiming that I have like ownership of a mountain near me or something. It's just like it's my house, and any reasonable court is going to uphold my right to this house because I'm not being unreasonable or something. So if we start there, then for example, even like the 999 people you said come into consensus. Think of it in a more egregious way. Okay, if those 999 people got together and had a vote and then say, okay, now since we agree we have a right to murder this person, or since we agree we have a right to like for sexually violate him, or like and then a more watered down version which we actually see is take his stuff. So just because you had a bunch of people coming together and agreeing that okay, now since we have this majority consensus, now we can violate his rights, it never makes it right. There are things that are always objectively wrong to do because they cause harm to sentient beings. That's the point I'm trying to make here, that we know right from wrong not by some guy coming and telling us, but through our own knowledge and reason. Like it's just through our own reasoning and understanding that we can understand that if we want to own ourselves and have self ownership in our own body, we must respect it in someone else, otherwise it's not valid for us as well. So it's like a contradiction. If you believe in self ownership, at the same time you believe that you can steal money from people and take their stuff, you don't really believe in self ownership, because if you want it, you have to give it to someone else as well, otherwise you don't have it to begin with.
Okay, interesting. So humans are like kind of species who form structures and live in groups, and they always need leaders. To can you imagine a society in world where there is no leader? And is it like, yeah, is it even realistic, or
So
we are
that's kind
just
of a
living in this utopia that
yeah,
there will be no leader and we can all work our way out?
that's kind of a straw man. Okay, because anarchy isn't talking about it's not against voluntary leaders. Okay, so look, if I'll give you an example, I'll give you like a real life example of how we can make these things work if you're actually moving that kind of system. And it's good to like think over these things and actually work out how the world will function without government. So if we all like everyone who's on the same ideological framework right now, who actually at least they don't agree all the way with anarchy, but like just let's get rid of the state and we'll
Yeah.
figure the way out. Okay, so if we all manage to say buy up some property, and we manage to move in that property like a community or a private community or something like that, what will happen is when that private community is inaugurated or someone who's taking the initiative, they will have certain rules for that community. Think of it like how we have consensus rules in Bitcoin. Okay, no one forced us to use Bitcoin. We voluntarily adopted into it. And once we did that, we basically agreed to the consensus rules that Satoshi laid out in his white paper. So, in the same way, if you have to move into a private community, there'll be rules beforehand. Like, there'll be a way to dissolve disputes. Like, if in this community, if someone has a dispute with them, like, people will priorly agree. Like, okay, we have a dispute, we'll resolve it here, we'll resolve it with this dispute resolution agency. And, that's the way things would work. So, all of these gray areas that are thinking about, okay, what if this, what if that, uh, people will largely live in these communities where these things will already be thought of. So the most common thing I get when I think of this is I've got this objection that okay, like Johan, uh, what if a couple is having sex, like,
Yeah,
and
who
you're
will decide?
outside you?
Exactly. I
Yeah.
got the same
And
question.
it's not really violating the non-aggression principle, because not taking anyone else's rights, but it's still obscure. Like, you don't want a child looking at someone having sex, like, right out in the open. So uh, like, you obviously would have the option to move in a community where that's not happening, and where the people in their own voluntarily agree to consensus rules are against that. So if someone was to move into that community, they wouldn't be subject to that, because it wouldn't be allowed there, literally, because the people have priorly agreed to being, like, to those rules before going and joining that property. So I mean, this is a realistic way that we can actually solve these disputes without having to really think of, okay, like, how's it going to work, who's it going to decide. We decide beforehand. Okay, like, so if you don't agree with something, you can always go and move it to another community. So a lot of people think this is like equal to government. Like, if you don't like what's going on in India, just move somewhere else. The problem is those people never acquired legitimate property rights. Okay, by any conception of property rights. Okay, we are talking about, like, this is a good segue. Think about it. You're telling me, okay, who will decide that I can own this forest or I can own this piece of land? Like, who decide government can just write this constitution and say, I own this vast piece of land called India? Like, just think of that. It's a group of people literally coming and telling you that we own this vast piece of land called India. And you're sitting and telling me who's gonna decide if I own this mound next to my house or not, when we literally believe in a system that's given a bunch of people the right to just claim ownership over this vast piece of land. So that's the kind of hypocrisy that comes in, because the government doesn't have legitimate property rights. Okay, it's not done any work, it's not done homesteading, as John Locke called it. That's the principle on which private property rights are based on, is that you make first use of something. It's like you mix your labor with the land. When did government do that? They just arbitrarily declared that this whole area of land is ours, and anyone living in that is agreeing to a consensus rule just by living there. So if I was think of it the same way, okay, if we anarchists, like the same example I gave you, 5,000 anarchists get here, have a vote, and have a consensus. Now we see that everyone who's living in Mumbai is agreed to our rules because we had a vote amongst ourselves and we had a good majority. Doesn't make any sense. Like, who's going to uphold that? So we haven't really thought these
But
things through. And
aren't
uh,
we selected those guys to decide? Like, for example, we do vote, and then the guy we voted for, he choose those leaders, and then they decide. So isn't it fair? Like, we are the
But that's what
one.
I'm saying. Just think of if we were to do the same thing right now. Okay, if you believe that government is just like us and the people who have voted them in are the same people who will vote for this group, why can't we do it? Why can't we do the same thing ourselves? Like, leave 5,000 people. Even if we get all the anarchists in the world to come here and do the same democratic voting procedure, we will even have a constitution. We'll, like, have a paper. We'll draft up all these things, and you will have the Bill of Rights, and, like, people who we sort of initiate aggression against or want to tax, they will have these rights. They will have these agencies that they can go to resolve the disputes. Like, the government tells us that if we have a problem, then we go to the courts. We take it to the courts to basically decide who's right, who's wrong. So basically, if we can't do that thing ourselves right now, like you're saying, like, okay, these people, the majority at large voted these politicians in, and then they had a vote. Firstly, think of it this way. The reason we're saying us doing it is wrong is because we are violating the property rights of someone else. So, like, my neighbor, for example, if we were to have a consensus amongst ourselves, if it's wrong for you to do, like, if it's wrong for you to go and rob her, you can't delegate it to someone else. So it's the same way that government works. Okay, how can a representative have more rights than you? We say that voting gives the power to government to do these things, so that the constitution gives it. Just, like, actually try to think of these words and what they mean. Okay, what is voting? It's just selecting a representative on your behalf. So the way I'd like to tell you is, if it's wrong for you to go and steal from your neighbor, can you call up, like, a third person and tell him, okay, now you're my representative, I'm calling you, and now since you represent me, now you can go and steal from the neighbor and it'll make it right? Like, no one's going to agree to that. So, how do we give the right to politicians to do things that we can't do? Like, the things that are wrong for us to do. Like, what I mean is, how did Parliament get the right to tax the country when it's wrong for anyone else to do? And if the government gets the rights from us, if we can't do it, how did government get it?
Okay, yeah, makes sense. So, do we have these models like of stateless society? Like, do we had any of these societies earlier on, or we are just making it up? And do we have a good example of the kind of society we are talking about?
Okay, so look, I'll let you take this both ways. Firstly, even if there was no society on this planet whatsoever, it doesn't really mean that the principles are wrong. Okay, think of it in this way. If rape was normal all around the world, or if theft is normal all around the world like it is right now, it doesn't make theft or rape good. It just means that people haven't valued freedom or liberty enough to be able to manifest this idea. So I'm just like saying this from the outfront. Even if there's no society, there is, but I'm saying even if there wasn't, it doesn't, like, it wouldn't be an argument against the principles of self ownership and property rights from which everything comes. So I mean, we can look at certain test cases in the world right now to see how these things are moving. We have countries like Liberland, for example. They're like, they have their own disputes right now, and they've not been able to fully resolve because they have disputes with Serbia and Croatia. But they like, WIT is basically starting a country based on voluntary taxes and based on libertarian principles of Bastiat and a lot of other people. So you have people trying to implement these ideas in real meat space world. It's not like they're not going to face opposition, because governments are always going to try to control people and take over people who are trying to do these things and live in freedom. But even in this place called Cheran in Mexico, you can look it up. It's a town that kicked out the politicians and kicked out the policemen, and the crime rates dropped, their murder rates dropped, like homicide rates, and all of this violent crime and bad things that were going on, they just dropped when they kicked out the politicians and police, and they're literally living in a voluntary arrangement where there's no leader, for example. Uh, sorry, they might even have a leader, but the point is that there's no coerced leader. So, like I was telling you earlier, anarchy is not really against leaders. Okay, if we say if you're working in an organization and you want to delegate someone, we want to decide that, okay, this guy will handle this, or this guy will handle the production side of things, this guy will handle the sales side of things. We're giving a hierarchy where, like, we're saying, you are in charge of this, you are in charge of this. There's nothing wrong in that. We're all agreeing that this person has the right to do this and this person has the right to do that. In the same way, if some people want to get together and say, okay, I trust this guy, I trust this leader, and I believe in his leadership skills, and I believe in what he stands for, and I will do what he says. As long as people voluntarily agree to that, there's nothing wrong in that. So you can always have leaders. It doesn't mean there's an absence of leaders or you can't have leaders. It's just that no one can forcefully come and control you against your will. If you want a leader, you choose one and you decide to live by what he's saying. And anytime you don't, you can always opt out of that. It's like right now we have leaders who we can't opt out of in our own property. If we have to opt out, we have to move somewhere else and leave our whole lives behind and entail these massive costs. I mean, we can have a discussion about why social contract theory is invalid as well, and why there are certain implicit, like the arguments made for implicit consent as well as explicit content are flawed on many grounds. But I mean, that again is going to take us into a whole separate discussion. But the point I'm trying to make is we can't opt out of these leaders. But the point you would have in an anarchist society is if you decided to arbitrate a judgment to someone else in a situation, like if you feel someone is an expert in something and you want to outsource a judgment to him, anytime you don't want to, you can always take your consent back, and there'll be no valid contract between you guys. You can always opt out of a contract, and it doesn't require you to give up your property to do that.
Okay, but that's what happening right now. But did we already hate this kind of society earlier on?
Sorry, can you be a little more?
Yeah.
Can you expand a little more on that?
Did we already hate this kind of society earlier on, like
You mean
thousands years back?
did we ever have anarchy
ever
in the
had,
past?
exactly.
So I just gave you a few examples of how
these are the current happenings.
people are trying to implement it right now. But if you see in history, it's like these ideas have been alive. It's not like people have just thought of this right now. Like I can give you cases of Islamic theologians and people within Islam who sort of considered anarchy and thought about anarchy in the past. But you can see the evolution of anarchy really from the classical liberal tradition. So a lot of the ideas that the American freedom fighters based the original American Constitution on was the original classical liberal ideas, which came about in UK and America and in the 18th to 19th century. And they basically, what were they saying? Like, government is evil. They didn't actually come to the idea that government, we can do without government, but they were basically saying that government is evil. The least we have of it, the better we can be. So we'll have this constitution that will actually, uphold our fundamental, like not fundamental rights, but just our rights. Fundamental rights is a construct. And they believe in minimum government. They believe that we have the right to basically end the government whenever we want to. If you the constitution, it basically says that anytime your government turns tyrannical, you can overthrow it and not consent to it at all. So these are the ideas that actually the American Constitution and the actual American minimum government was based on. But like I argue with most minarchists, you might want a minimum government and you might want a minimum state, but just because you want it doesn't mean it's going to keep it there. Like there's never been a case in the history of the world, for example, where someone has been able to create a government and keep it minimum. Like start off as a minimum government and it stays minimum. Just doesn't work like that, because you're creating an institution of authority, and as soon as you create that, you're basically telling anyone who goes into it that they have more power over you. So why will they want to keep
Yeah,
it limited? They'll want to naturally expand to as much as they can, and the constitution will erode over time. The Supreme Court will get corrupted. The Supreme Court is basically there to give the stamp of approval that something is constitutional, and it's an arm of the government. So if we actually, like, even if we had a constitution normally, and if people were free to interpret, okay, or people were to choose their own legal experts to interpret the constitution, and someone had disagreements, then those would be valid disagreements. But now that the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court says, the government says something or does something or legislates something, and the Supreme Court says it's constitutional, there's just no debate. Like, it's over. Like, the Supreme Court said so, now there can be no more truth than that. But that's not true at all. Like, they can be wrong as well. It's not like they're anointed by God or something that makes all the judgment the last final judgment. But we all have the right to disagree anytime we want to.
yeah, that makes sense. So the next question is asked by my friend Raj. So he's asking, like, what should be the immediate goal of thinking Indians? What should they do, man?
I would basically say, firstly, at least become curious, start to look at the world around you, because there's a lot of areas to look into. Like, we are talking about anarchy and stuff now, but just like, as you can see, like with the books we're surrounded by, there are loads of subject areas that there is a lot to know on that we're not being told. And if people were to go and explore these areas, they would have some mind blowing revelations about how things are really working in the world, and just to awaken that curiosity, to awaken that spirit of care, like to start actually caring about the things that are going on in the world, because I think that's sorely missing. It's like people are distracted, people are stuck into this 9 to 5 culture, or people are just busy partying and living mundane lives.
Yeah, what's wrong
And
with that?
there's nothing wrong with that, but it's wrong in context. I mean, there's nothing wrong in you watching the sport or going to a football game, but then if that's the focus of your life and if that's all you're doing, ignoring things that are actually going on in the real world in consequence, it's a bad thing, because you're directly responsible for the enslavement of your fellow man. Like, just by own ignorance, you're literally causing other people to be in pain and misery, because you're not really standing up against I mean, there's this saying that if you don't take sides in the times of oppression, like you're standing with the oppressor. So in the same way, if we don't actually start speaking up to injustices that are taking place in society, and start taking just standing for the truth because it is the truth, not because uh, you have some obligation to serve it, but it's just doing the right thing regardless of whatever someone has told you to do or whatever money is involved over there. That sense of care is sorely missing from people, and this is why we are in the state we are in right now, because people haven't bothered to care about the erosion of our freedoms. I mean, people don't even know what rights are. If people don't know what the rights are, why will they care if they're being taken away? So if that's the point. Once you get informed and once you start understanding and some concepts like natural law and anarchy and the non-aggression principle and all these things, you can objectively tell right from wrong. Okay, you can tell that, there is no gray area. If someone is like, causing aggression against you, initiating violence against you, it's always wrong. Someone is like, raping you, it's always wrong. There's no gray area in that, or there's no non-objective subjective component in that. Like I said, there are always continuums, but it doesn't make the act of rape right somehow, because some majority can agree and make it right, or it can't even make theft right that way. So if we understand that theft is always wrong, we need to be against government, and we need to do our best to, like, keep our tax money from them, because if we're going to give it up to them, they're literally going to use it to do things that none of us wanted to do. Just think of it this way, okay? If I asked you today, uh, you like, this is the government budget. Do you agree with everything, single thing that's over here? Like,
Mm.
and any sane person would say, no, I don't want my money going here. I don't want my money going here. So if you're actually against the government doing something with your money, it's taking it against your consent. Because if you had the choice, you would not give it to them. Obviously, if you disagree with something where money is being spent and you don't want your own energy to be used that way, why would you give it up? But you're being forced to give it up. So, I mean, these are the kind of conclusions you come to when you understand objective, not morality, but just objective rights in general. That there are things that actually cause wrongdoing, and that there are things that we have the right to do because they don't initiate wrongdoing against others. And just starting from that framework, those are the principles on which we should try to evaluate things that are going on in society, and try to move towards a society where we can eventually manifest freedom. We can manifest true freedom without having to coerce others, or, like, violate the rights of others and initiate aggression against them in some way or the other. So the thing I'd like Indians to do is, firstly, obviously, just become curious and start to look into this information. But there's an urgent sense for people to actually wake up to the things that are going on around them, because we have an agenda by the governments and by the people who control the governments around the world to take us down a very dark and Orwellian road into a surveillance technocratic nightmare where they want a world government. They want like a tyrannical police state all over the world, and they want this surveillance state where no one has the freedom to even have privacy, or to have privacy in their own mind, in their own thoughts. And there are many sorts of tyrannical things that these people are planning. And I mean, obviously, like, this will again be a topic for a whole different discussion. But a lot of researchers have been writing and trying to expose this stuff since a very long time, and we're seeing their books that were written in the 1990s playing out now in change in society with what they predicted back then and what's actually going on right now. So there is a very real dark agenda that the occult controllers of this world, the elite, are engaging in. And only if we wake up to that and we acknowledge what's going on will we be able to change the direction of the world. Because if people are going to stay asleep right now and they're just going to think about themselves and their own lives and their own problems, we are going to be taken down a road where we have the possibility of losing everything we love.
Okay, so if we have no governments and no authorities, then who will save us? Like, we will not have police, and we will not have armies, and like,
Okay.
who will save
So
us
so
from that?
let's come to trying to figure out how defense would work without the state. Okay, so I have
Not
some.
exactly defense. I'm against army as well, but
Yeah. No, I don't mean defense in
police.
the
Yeah, yeah.
mainstream sense. I just mean the right for you to defend
Defend
yourself
yourself.
against someone who's initiating aggression against you. So the common reason minarchists believe in a state is because they want the government to uphold property rights, and they want the police to and the military to actually protect them against people who are aggressing against their property rights. So in the same way, if you think of it right now, if firstly, in a world without the government, you would have every right to defend yourself. So there's going to be no government that's going to tell you that you don't have the right to bear this arm or that arm. You can even have a bazooka if you want to. Like, no, no, the right to bear arms, the right to bear arms. Like, there are no, you can own this weapon, but you can't own that weapon. Like, no weapon is too less for self-defense. Like, if there's a tyrannical government against you, you need a bazooka with you. A handgun is not going to do. So, basically, you would have the full right to defend yourself. Obviously, you would have the right to initiate in whatever defensive action you want to take in. And other than that, I mean, for example, like I think I know what you're thinking right now, that what if someone is poor, or what if someone doesn't have the resources to defend themselves? That's just the reality of the world. Like, you have poor people right now as well, but stealing money from other people and giving defense to them is always wrong. As long as we can agree with that, forcefully taking money from other people and then providing service to them is wrong. All the euphemisms of taxation and the greater good aside, then we can basically start to think about, okay, how will we care for those people without the state, without having people's money forcefully taken from them to care for these people. So at least I would, like, I know I would obviously, support people who can't support themselves. You know Basically provide things to them, like, if people are homeless, I'll try my best to basically in my means to be able to help people out who can't survive, or who can't, like, basically get basic things in life. And I'm sure everyone would. The point is, society would be much wealthier without the state, because you wouldn't have this runaway rampant inflation, and you wouldn't have these coercive taxes that actually drain the wealth from these people. You wouldn't have these price controls. You wouldn't have all these bad things that government do that actually render shortages, make induce famines, make people poor. So you will get rid of a lot of the bad stuff. So naturally, the per capita income and the, like, the wealthier people are going to rise in society. So you're going to have a lot less people who are poor than you would have now, if we lived in a world with sound money and we didn't have a state. But you still have people who are genuinely poor, and we would have to think about how we would care for them privately without having to force money from other people and, like, then help them. So even leaving the poor people aside, there's still people who might not be able to care for themselves, like, say, disabled people or children, for example. So it's our responsibility. I mean, this is what we say. Okay, in Bitcoin, for example, we enforce our own rules, right? Like, we run our own nodes, and we basically say that, like, we opted into the consensus rules, and now we're running our own nodes, so we're enforcing these rules. Like, there's no who decides. It's like you decide. Like, you run the own node, so you decide basically what rules are enforced. So in the same way, in a world without the state, if you see someone committing aggression, it's your responsibility to intervene and to, like, basically enforce the rules yourself as a good person. Or if you see someone stealing, it's your responsibility as a citizen to step in and, like, be a good Samaritan and change that situation. So there's no really who decides. It all comes down to what individuals want to do with their own will, and whether they're able to align with the truth and enforce it, or whether they don't understand it and, like, they want tyranny to take place in the world.
So what you are saying is we don't need police, we can defend ourselves.
Yes, so obviously, like, think of it right now. Okay, if I was stuck in a situation right now where my life was under jeopardy, and I wanted defense. Okay, firstly, like, even if I think the attacker is too big and I don't personally have the means to defend myself, and I don't have a community around me that's going to come and, like, basically have my back. So obviously, the first thing is you build a community of like-minded people around yourself. So you provide defense in your own community. Like, if you have a private community and you're scared against attackers, that would be a real need for people, and they would fund it. Like, if there's a need, then people are going to come and pay
Yeah,
for it.
exactly. That's
So
what going on in most of these societies. They have their private.
exactly, like, we have more private security right now in compounds and societies than we have police, and people don't feel threatened with them in their own society. Like, they don't have these superhuman rights that the police do, that they can, like, come and mow down your house, or steal your assets and stuff like that go on in a lot of these places, or, like, engage in brutality against you. The point is, if in a world without the state, if a private defense firm was to engage in that kind of behavior, you could always choose to not pay it and put it out of business. You can't do that right now. The only option you have is to hopelessly try to bring someone else, who's more likely than not to just continue the same thing that have been going on. So instead of actually having this utopian dream that you can control a government once you create it, which there's no empirical evidence for. Like I said, no one's able to actually create a government and then keep it limited. So instead of that, we have a very real option of like, employ private defense firms And if someone, like, has tyrannical tendencies or moves towards becoming a state, you can basically just shift your resources and start funding someone else, and, like, make them obsolete in the marketplace. So those are how those incentives work, and the profit and loss system will basically put them out of business if they are to overstep their lines or become tyrannical or something like that. So that's my point. Like, I would trust a private defense firm right now. If I was paying a private defense firm from my own money, I would trust them much more. They would have much more of an incentive to come and defend me right now if I was stuck in a situation than everyone paying for this police force, and then this police force having just this moral kind of obligation, which most of them don't even have,
They're more
honestly.
like monopolistic
Yeah, I
kind
mean,
of.
like, the only reason people sort of empathize with the police and think that they actually care for people is because they're supposed to have this moral obligation. I'm not saying some of them don't. Like, a lot of them are, they're good people in the police, like there are good people in the military and stuff like that. Like, I'm not really talking about the people over there. I'm talking about the institutions in general. That even if someone in the police has a good obligation or a heart to protect you, I have had my experiences with police, and I know, like, in many cases a lot of the departments are underfunded. Like, the money is going to the government, but they're not really getting that to be able to do their job well. So instead of all of these things, instead of having this big bureaucratic state that engages in corruption and takes half of our money in the middle, like, wherever it wants to give it, why can't we just pay these people directly? If we want a service, who would you trust more? Like, some guy in a police force who has only a moral obligation to protect you and is not getting directly compensated by you, or would you trust someone that's taking your money and has a direct incentive to compete in the marketplace and make sure that he provides a good service to you, so you choose him the next time?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people think capitalism would work in clothes and it would work in housing and all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why it won't work in defense or it won't work in the legal system.
Exactly. And same for the roads and everything,
Yeah,
right?
so I mean, just think of people think of, like,
Like,
roads as some
yeah, most people,
arcane.
whenever I, say all these things, they are like, who will build the roads? And
Yeah, so
that is their major concern.
most people think roads are like this arcane secret that's been kept by only some private companies, or, oh, only they have the knowledge to build these roads, and if they went away, or if the government went away, then that knowledge would just disappear and we would not know how to build roads. Like, my good friend just shared a picture yesterday. He has a private sort of community that he's building in Pune, and he's building his own road right now. So, that's a real thing. I tell you, like, without the government, we would build the roads. It's just that the reason people ask that question is they can't comprehend that. Okay, for example, let's say we want to build a road in this area, and everyone agrees, but this one idiot, like, who's over there, he basically says, no, I don't want this road to come here. So roads don't only, like, build in a straight line. You can always go above his property or you can go below his property, and you can always, like, ostracize him for that. You can, like, basically make this list and say this idiot came in the way of our road and we had to go to this inconvenience and people had to pay a little more for that, and you can stop him from using your road. Like, if he's against your road, then
Yeah.
it's your private property. You can stop him from using it. So people would have the incentives to actually go ahead with things and pay for things. And it's not like that problem goes away right now. So if you look in the current system right now as well, it's not like everyone agrees to have their properties taken away. Like, if the government wants to come and do some project over here next to my house, and if I have to give up my house, it's not like I agree with that. But the government has eminent domain, so it's just gonna come and kick me out, and probably, like, possibly give me some shitty remuneration somewhere else, or somehow somewhere else, which I don't really want. But I don't have an option. So just because, people are being forced to get off right now, and it just becomes easy for them to forcefully move people out and be able to build their road or the infrastructure project or the airport or whatever they want to do, doesn't mean that you're not violating someone else's rights. So in a world without government, we would still have these people who would have these problems with their property being taken away or not. But the incentives would be obviously much more to go ahead with a protect them to not, for the reasons I said. And if someone doesn't like a certain road, there are always multiple ways to get to one place. So if you don't like, say, this road builder, for example, he has too much surveillance on his road. He has too many CCTVs. Like, someone, I wouldn't want to go and use this road, so I'd probably just, like, take another road. Like, there's always multiple ways to get to one place, someone can always build a flyover, someone can always go underground. So you don't restrict yourself to that opportunity. As long as you're not infringing on anyone else's rights, you can build property wherever you like. So that's how these things would tend to work out. And we've had examples of private roads in the past. Like there have been turnpike roads in the USA where private merchants have got together basically and say, for example, we are a shop, like we are a bunch of shops in this area, we don't have a road right now. It's obviously an incentive for us. If we are going to fund a road over here, more people are going to pass, and they're more likely to come in our shop and buy stuff. So these kinds of incentives will always be there for people to come in, or for crowdfunding, community funding things. Like someone starts an initiative that they want to, not just a road but for anything. People will come and chip in, and it's not always going to be fair. You might have someone who doesn't want to pay for it, but since it's private property, you can always decide, someone doesn't want to pay for it, they won't get to use the service, and if they're okay with that, that's fine. I mean, you have to deal with that. So I think these are some of the ideas with how the roads would tend to work out. And it's not like, I'm just giving basic ideas, but look, the legal system, police, military, roads, all these things that we can't think how without government would function. People have written entire books on this. Walter Block has done 3 books on water capitalism, on privatizing roads and highways. He's even done his last book on privatizing space. So people have written lengthy books with tons of footnotes that you can go and dig into for exactly how these things would work out and how we would make them work in a libertarian property rights regime. And people have written books about the justice system as well, like Bruce Benson, Robert Murphy. They've done good work on explaining how the justice system will work without the state. And I obviously draw my ideas for a lot of them, but I do my own thinking as well and try to think of how these things would work without the state.
Okay, makes a lot of sense again. So the next question is from Raj again, and he's asking how much of a state structure can be engineered through open markets.
I think we already discussed
Yeah, I think
that.
we
So
already said
we're
that.
talking about. So I think the things we didn't go into are how the military would be funded. So let's
Yeah.
try to think about that, for example. So right now we're having to coercively pay for a military. Firstly, we have artificial borders. Let's face that. Like we said, government doesn't really have property rights. Uh, if you feel there's intuitively something wrong, or me going and walking in a forest and saying this piece of land is mine, the government has done that to a much, much, much larger area by just arbitrarily declaring it. And there's no evidence to suggest that
Dictating it.
yeah, dictating and declaring it. But there's no evidence to suggest that everyone at that point in time agreed that government can have this property right over this vast area of land. There'll be thousands of dissidents and thousands of people who disagreed with that. So if we just think of it that way, firstly, the borders are artificial. Okay, we need to get rid of these borders, and we need to have property rights individually that the courts upheld, which are fair. When we start from there, basically, look, defense is a service. Like I said, if people feel that threatened, they'll want to pay for it. They'll want to divert their resources from something where they're spending like food, or food is obviously essential, but something like luxuries, like going out for movies or something. They'll defer the spending over there, and they'll allocate those resources to put it in ways where the defense is more prioritized. So they'll handle their own budget in a sort of way. So that's a good model for how insurance companies can handle these things, because basically, like, it's for example how we think right now. If this building was to catch on fire, we would basically have fire insurance beforehand. If this building was to catch on fire, we get compensated against that. So in the same way, there would be insurance companies would be offering insurance for, let's say, for example, if a foreign country was to invade. I'm not even saying the whole world has to go anarchist. Indians, like right now, we can go anarchist in our own country, and we can still defend ourselves against Pakistan in a free market. Okay. So, you would have these insurance companies that would basically give contracts for example, like, you insuring yourself against someone invading your country. And then they would have every incentive to ensure that the odds that happen are very less. So if a fire insurance company, let's say, for example, they'll reduce your premium if they come into your house and you show them, like, look, there's a sprinkler over here, so there's less chance. The building code is very strong. They had fire safety regulations. They implemented those codes already. So, there's very less chance of fire will break out here. So they might charge a less premium from you. So in the same way, insurance companies would have an incentive to try to reduce the attacks that these things would have. So they would themselves use the premium money and try to, let's say for example, have some missile defense systems, okay, like have placed in strategic locations. So if there are missiles coming in, then they would sort of put some money, or they would say like, okay, someone who can deter missiles, we agree to pay you this much, so you can come and provide that service to us. Or let's say for example, like there would be no standing, obviously armies obviously without the state, because that's a massive waste of resources. Like why do you just want an army just standing over there in the event of something happening? So these things will always be provided by the market. And if the insurance company feels that taking certain steps is going to reduce its obligation to pay you, because it obviously wants to do something to reduce the payout, right? Like, so if there's a invasion and they have to pay you for the insurance, then they obviously have to pay you much more. So if they're going to use some of that money in making sure that they can do the best to actually stop that event from happening, they're not going to have to pay you compared to how much they're going to have to pay in the defense. So these kinds of incentives would be then actually in order to make sure that the national defense sort of gets sorted out in that kind of way.
Okay. So how you personally practice anarchy in your day-to-day life?
So basically, I'd like to venture into the subject of agorism a bit now, because agorism is literally anarchy applied. So agorism basically advocates the use of black markets and gray markets in order to reduce state power and to be able to build our own counter economy parallel to the state. So this is something I've always encouraged people to do. It's like once they're on the same intellectual and ideological framework, they are principled people who believe that okay, like they agree that okay, I don't have the right to initiate aggression against people just to fund things that I want or just to do things that I want. It's always wrong to do that. Then basically, we can literally start to reduce state power. I mean, obviously, it's like just me and you evading taxes here isn't going to put a much of a dent to them or reduce their budget by
Yeah.
much. But this is the reason these ideas are so powerful, because if they catch on and people understand that they're being stolen from, or the government is forcefully taking the money against their will to do things that they are abhorrently opposed to. Like, just look at this example right now. Okay, you have tons of people in the streets protesting NRC and CAA. And those poor people are like, having to pay the tax money to pay for the same police that's going to come and like, hit them and lathi charge on them. And like, they're going to have to fund this program as well against their will. And they're like violently, abhorrently opposed to it. Otherwise, they wouldn't come out on the streets like this. So just imagine if those people did their best in their life to stop paying taxes. If a big community grew up, we could even have defense for ourselves to protect ourselves against the police. So, like, if there's like a bunch of, say, 10,000 people who agree that they don't want to pay taxes and they all move to, like, one place after sort of networking and coming together, they can actually set up their own defense to defend themselves against the state's police and stuff. And, we'd have more power shifting to our side. And obviously, that's a whole gradual process that's going to have to take place. But you have to start somewhere, right? Like, if we don't even start with the ideas and the possibility that, if we continue down this trajectory, there is some scope that we have a real physical chance to build our own counter economy, to be able to engage with entrepreneurs that aren't paying taxes, like people who are providing services without having to pay homage to the state. If we start valuing those things more and we actually start thinking about, okay, like this money is my energy, I've worked my entire life for it. If I have to pay 30% taxes, the state is literally saying that I'm a government servant for 30% of my time. They're literally saying that 365 days out of the year, around 100 or so, you're working for the government because your money is going to be used to do things that they want. Keeping all the euphemisms aside, that the government is us and all of those stupid things according to me, but the government is not us. Like, we know that there's a bunch of people out there who are enforcing commands and the rest of the nation has to obey. Like, if you had a say in that, then they wouldn't really be authority for you. So agorism is a very powerful way once we understand the impact that not paying taxes can have. And even like the crypto community, they're doing great, for example, with using alternative ways to save their wealth. Because the way we'll obviously go into this in another episode, but the way the state gets their power is because of the monopoly on the money supply. Okay, they've basically said that they've outlawed all competition in the money market, and they're saying that okay, like we have the monopoly on the rupee right now. No one has the monopoly to compete with a private currency in this geographical area. and we decide how much of it is getting created. We decide how much of it we inflate, which they obviously have every incentive to just keep inflating because they need to pay their debts off, and the system won't survive if they stop taking more debt to pay back previous debt, because there is never enough money in the economy to be able to pay back all the debt. The interest is never created, so you're always going to have a shortage, and you're never going to be able to pay back all the debt by spending within your means. So wait, I forgot what I was going with that.
Yeah, anyway,
But
so yeah, so I was asking like what you do personally on your personal level, and you said
yeah,
that you just try to avoid taxes and
yeah. So
use black
yeah.
markets, right?
So basically, that's what I was saying. So when you use Bitcoin, you're literally telling the state that I don't want to save in a currency which you can inflate. So they're not stealing from you that way, because the taxes is obviously theft, but the more important and subliminal theft that's taking place in society is the government's monopoly on the money supply, because they can literally create how much of it they like, and because you are saving in their currency, you're giving them the power to steal from you. So if say for example, I worked for you today, like say we did this podcast and we had some arrangement that okay, like you're providing me the service, I'll pay for you, and you decided to take that money and store it in rupees. Think of what you store if you stored it in Bitcoin, for example. I'm not even saying like 1 month from now. We'll just think like in the long run, 2-3 years. What do you think is going to perform better? The rupee is obviously going to depreciate because they're obviously going to create more of it. But Bitcoin is going to go up in the long run because of its scarcity properties. So you'd be much better off just storing your money in something that is not inflatable. Some monetary policy community can't just increase it per their whims and fancies, and that this is a way that we can, if in large numbers we all stopped using fiat money, we already run on the banks, and we took our money from the banks because we understand that these people are using our money to create much more money than they actually have, and we actually like went to sound money. uh, Not paying taxes and using sound money are two very powerful ways. If done in large numbers, we can literally shrink the power of the state. And I'm not saying they're not going to go after you or there's going to be no guns or violence involved. But the more people we have on our side, the better chance we have to actually make that kind of thing possible.
So realistically, what they can do is, just try to avoid taxes using other form of payments,
Yeah, so I
peer-to
mean,
payments, and use black markets.
try to buy
And
from
what
black markets as much
and
as possible. Black
and
marketers are basically taking on a risk to be able to give you that, like
and
they
how to
go.
access black market? Just a normal overview, so that
I mean, in Mumbai, it's going to be pretty common for you that these hotspots where people sell things in black. Like, if you're from Mumbai, you already know what those places are without having like me to mention it. But I mean, in your own area, like, this is something that's going to be a personal responsibility for people. But try to network, try to reach out to like minded people, and see with them, build your own community, build your own sort of freedom cell. For example, this idea of freedom cell that my friend Derek Bro started is basically once people align with an anarchist mindset and an understanding that the state is illegitimate and we want to reduce their power, we can basically get together and have a group of us. And the more we have of us, the more people we have who are going to provide services to us. So let's say, for example, in my group, you're someone who's an actor who does video services, and I want that. So I will go to someone else when I can take that from you. It's going to be direct between us, and we're not going to have to pay any taxes. So the more number of people we have who ideologically come on the same wavelength, they are automatically going to align with each other and engage in trade, engage in things with each other. You're going to encourage more businesses to do that because you're basically saying that this community doesn't want to fund the state, but they are more than willing to, even at some extra cost, they're willing to fund someone who's willing to not pay taxes and to engage in black market activity. So we would all be more than happy, and we would have an incentive for those kind of things to come up. I mean, obviously not like a group of 10 of us, but if the idea expands, there you would have these incentives in the marketplace for people to move to and give black market services than the state. And the more we reduce the power of the state, the less power they have to surveil us, the less power they have to track us, and everything is sort of it's sort of an uphill battle. But it's like you put this lever down and you put this lever up. So at one point you reduce the power of the state with them, so they have less money to do with you what they want to do, and at the same time you build these counter institutions. So the less of this and the more of that, the better it's going to be for society overall.
Amazing. Okay, so last unrelated question, so to end this episode, do you believe in God? And
Uh,
what are your thoughts and opinions on God? Like,
Basically, I don't believe in God as most people sort of characterize God like this. A lot of religions characterize him as this guy with a beard sitting in the clouds and stuff like that. I believe God is us. I believe we are all aspects and fragments of God, and God is the state of infinite consciousness that embodies all of us, and we are aspects of it. So it's not like there's a separate God somewhere, and it's like we're disconnected from that. But God is literally embedded in the essence of all of us, and it's something that we can connect to. The more we expand our mind, the more we expand our consciousness, the closer we get to God. Because God, in a very very deep sense, God is truth and God is love. And I don't mean love in a sense of just romantic love or hookup love, but I mean love in the sense of standing up for what's right, doing what you believe in. Like, there's this true deep fire that burns in your heart of actually serving the truth and doing the right thing. The more you expand your mind and the more you start to walk on that path, the closer and closer you will get to God eventually. And that's what I think God is.
amazing. Any questions you have for me?
No, I don't have questions, but I just like to compliment you with what you're doing. There are very few people right now who are actually, even I wouldn't say there are few people who are open to these ideas, but there are few people who are actually trying to do something about it. So I'll congratulate you in your efforts that you're actually trying to at least, you know, create a podcast where you yourself can learn, but you can educate others at the same time. So kudos for that. Good job.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, amazing. Thanks for coming on, man. So, where people can find you, like?
So I basically started my website a couple of months ago. It's called anarchyforfreedom.in, where you can go and just other than the topics we've discussed, there's a ton of information on different subjects that you can basically go and dive into over there. And I've already also started a YouTube channel by the same name, Anarchy for Freedom India. So I'm doing some in-depth content on some of the issues that are pertaining to my research. So please feel free to go and check out and hit me up if anything interests you and you want to delve deeper into it.
Amazing, man. So your YouTube channel is amazing. I checked that out. So please go and check his YouTube channel out. Thank you.